Hi, everyone. I've got a wonderful treat for you today. I'm going to be speaking to the fabulous Veda Austin, and I'm sure all of you know Veda. They know you know her by her first name. You know, I don't even have to add the surname. Everybody knows it's Veda. For the small handful of people who may not know about Veda, she's an extraordinarily original person. She's a water researcher, international speaker, author, artist, very importantly, mother. She believes that water is fluid intelligence, and all of her work has demonstrated that. And fluid intelligence that is observing itself through every living organism on the planet, which I think is beautiful. You've got some beautiful terminology, Veda. And she photographs water in its state of creation and produces exquisite crystallography. So what we're going to be talking about today is her magnificent book called The Living Language of Water, which I'm absolutely thrilled the copy arrived for me to devour before this conversation. It's over 300 pages and I loved every single bit of it. It's world-class publishing. I mean, it's so high quality and you must be absolutely thrilled with it. And it can either, one level just almost sit on your coffee table and you can browse it and become mesmerized by the crystallography, or because you write so beautifully as well, Veda, I found that I was just diving deeper into my own divinity and my own source of creation as I read it. So, just thank you for creating this legacy for yourself, but this milestone, not only in helping humanity understand water, but better understand their consciousness. So, and you are so unique in doing that. So, big congratulations and hat off to you for this magnificent book. I recommend it to everybody. It's a fabulous gift for people as well, actually, by the way. So out of all of this, Veda, what are you most proud of?
Oh my goodness, I'm still getting over that incredible introduction, Pam. Thank you so much for that. Um, I think I'm very proud of the fact that I've managed to put my heart and soul into this book without leaving anything I think important out. It was very important to me that people be able to have the ability to share with other people, to say, see, that's what I'm talking about. Here's that lady that was doing that thing with water and you didn't fully understand it. Well, this is what I mean.
Yeah.
Because it does take the pictures to really help people absorb why I'm so enthusiastic about this. Because when you see the over 1,500 photos in that book, and you see over and over and over again that there really is such a lot of consistency, then it kind of brings you to this point where you might wonder, does water really store information? Well, perhaps yes. By the look of this, it really, really does. And then the further question, I think, which I hope people get to when reading the book, is asking the question, what is water to them? And it's hard to say what I'm most proud of because, it kind of implies like it's my work, but this is the work of water. And so every picture is a picture of water having a conversation with me in a visual way, and then how I've responded to that and how I've felt into it. So in many ways, it's a very vulnerable, open story, um, that where water's taken me on a very visual journey. I think some of the more sentimental parts to the book mean a lot to me.
Mm.
Um, there's a chapter called Water and Spirit,
Yeah.
where I've been able to be very, very open in my sharings about how I think that water and spirit are so intimately connected, and how I've seen the response to asking if water could connect to my mum who passed in 1999. But also one of the not one of the more interesting, but certainly curious, is that my grandmother, Revis, she was a bit radical back in the day, And she divorced, which was not done. She divorced my grandfather back in the 1940s, which was a very frowned upon thing back then. And she remarried, and they flew from England to Miami, and then they caught a little plane called the Star Ariel, which took them from Miami over to Barbados. But that plane went down over the Bermuda Triangle and was never found. And I used to wonder about her. And so I asked Water to connect, to this picture that of the article of when talking about where the plane went down. And so I put the dish of water on top of that article, and the result was really, really extraordinary.
Mhm.
Um, the result looked just like a vortex, or like um, a kind of what is like a what's it called when you kind of go through this tunnel,
Like a
like a
wormhole, like a portal.
like a portal. And I've not seen water look quite like that ever before. So that was a really extraordinary for me. Um, I've enjoyed that I've been able to invite people that I've respected in the world of water to also share. So I think I'm just proud of the whole thing, because it's not just one thing, it's a collective. And my work, what I call my work is collective molecular photography. So I think this work as a collective is a story, a very visual story, and it's just a story of water.
Yes.
Um,
And I
I
love
just get
your sort of open curiosity as well. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I've got so many favorites that, I mean, the Bermuda Triangle was extraordinary because you could feel the energy of the vortex sort of drawing you down. I understand it's very electromagnetic, very strongly electromagnetic there, which is absolutely fascinating. But there's so many aspects of the book I love. Um, one of my favorites is where you'd taken some crystals of sunflower seed, expecting that you'd get a crystal of the sunflower seed, but you didn't. You got an image of the full blossom flower, didn't you? And your
I did.
conclusion to that was that water is always reading our highest potential, which was so beautiful to see that.
Absolutely. I mean, I've shared all my studies that have been so well received and so shared so regularly. And I think that when people get to visually see that water's reading potential. So I did it with the sunflower, as you said. I also did it with a flax seed. We have a lot of flax just out in our garden. So it designed the pod, which is where the seeds come from. It's the fruit of the flax. And I did it with an apple seed as well. But what's interesting about the apple is that I I put the apple seed in the water for 30 seconds, removed, and then froze, and it designed the apple. And then I let that crystallography melt, and then I refroze it several hours later, and I saw that the apple image was still there. And then I let that melt, and then I refroze it 3 days later, and we saw that the apple impression was still there. And I discovered that biological things such as seeds and bodily fluids seem to have a longer impression, where the water seems to hold the information steady for quite a long time.
Yeah, that was astonishing. I absolutely loved it. I love this idea of water as our evolutionary impulse. I mean, that absolutely fascinated me, as you can expect with my work. But and just a quote from the book, because you said water is always ahead of us as an evolutionary impulse, and you said that the Mu Hawaiians honor and remember that water holds the instructions for evolution itself. They believe that inner earth water carries imprints of the beginning of time on earth and that which existed before earth. I mean, I was just electrified by that. So, are you suggesting there, Veda, that earth originally came from water way, way, way back?
I think that, well, that was written by my friend and
Yeah,
indigenous, not exactly elder, because he's like a young elder, because he's so wise, Keone.
yeah.
Um, but they have such a wonderful understanding, I believe, of life that has been handed down through their oral stories. And what he's saying, and within that, I think that there's an allusion, he's alluding to that. But I love what he talks about with the octopus.
Yeah.
And he was saying that the octopus, because it has these 8 legs, and they believe that it was an ancestor that came from another place to this world, and that the octopus really truly is an ancient ancestor, and these legs are in 8 different places cosmically.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot there when you start talking about indigenous wisdom. And Keone, I mean, I'm so grateful he was able to, share his wisdom in the book. People can read and feel into what that means for them as well, and also reach out to him. I think that he'd be a wonderful person to really talk to, because he can share their deeper beliefs more eloquently than I can.
Yeah, well, it was beautiful writing. So, and I know Heather Ensworth has had several interviews with him, my good friend Heather. So, the another aspect of the book that I found fascinating, because it's so helpful for people to see how their thoughts and their emotions impact the water, but then presumably every single cell in their body. When you taken crystallography of urine of a person when they were very stressed, and then an hour later from that same person after an hour's meditation, and the difference in the crystallography was absolutely remarkable, quite dramatic. And that really demonstrates to people, because all feels quite invisible, doesn't it? Your thinking and your emotions are all invisible, and what difference can that make? Well, dramatic, because that must be in every single cell of your body too, and that's what we're broadcasting to the world as well.
I
So I
think it's really
find that fascinating.
visual.
Yeah.
So this is urine from someone who is stressed, and that's the same urine an hour after meditation. It's completely different.
Yeah.
And this is someone who's dehydrated after, and then after hydration. So we really do see, structural differences within urine from our own body. And it's so easy, it's very easy to access. And people think, oh God, it's urine. But actually, with the stage of freezing that I use, people will often ask, oh, how come it's not, yellow? But actually, because it's such a short-term freezing technique, and you're waiting for there to be liquid on top and ice underneath, that's the stage you take it out. When you tip the liquid away, a lot of those minerals and all that kind of stuff that makes the urine yellow, actually drain away, and you're looking at the crystallography, which is quite clear actually. So we really are looking at what's going on within you. It's like this wonderful window into our biology when we're working with urine. You can literally pee into a petri dish and then go and see what it looks like.
Yeah, and equally on the other side, if whenever you have a suggestion of love, when you're asking questions about your mum, or you suggest anything with love, you almost reliably get a heart appearing in the crystallography. And presumably you have a heart in every little cell in your body. It's replicated. What you're seeing in the petri dish is replicated within us. And, I find that really powerful, because it's such a clear visual demonstration for people. I think it will really help people to understand our mastery of our emotions is so incredibly important, not only for our health, but also what we're broadcasting into the collective as well.
Yeah, I've had people send me so many of those hearts in their crystallography when they've projected love, that it's something I see virtually every day. Someone will send me an image of a heart after having projected love, genuine love, into their petri dishes. I'm so excited because now literally thousands of people are doing this work. So such a lot of crystallography is sent to me each day of people saying, oh my God, look at this, look at this, look at this. And I think that's one of the greatest thrills for me, is that other people are doing it, and their relationships are deepening because of this. One of the stories I think I really am glad that I was able to share, which talks about I think the power of connection and relation, was the story that I shared about when some people were wanting me to really see, oh, is this real? Like, can we quantify this through scientific means? And they had a scientist who was from Canada coming over to do some work for them from some separate thing. And they basically paid for him to work with me for about 10 days. That was the longest he could do. And all he really had access to was the lab. He wasn't able to get robotic arms, which is what he would have preferred. He wanted to have no human interaction within the experiments that he wanted to do. You know how I feel about that word. And so what he did was I explained the whole procedure to him, and I told him the significance of human conscious interaction. And he said, well, we don't want that at all, which, from a scientific perspective, he's wanting to see if water will just do this without any interaction. And so the best he could do with very short notice was to essentially set up a computer. He had someone program a computer so that it just randomly shared about 2,000 photos were logged into it, and it would just move, 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 move. He had the petri dish right in front of it, and then it would stop on a picture, and that would be the imprint picture. So, and then he would come into the lab, and the back of the computer would be up like this. So he wouldn't see what the picture was. He'd shut the computer, then he'd come around and he'd get the dish, and then he would freeze it using my method. And every day he would message me, nothing there, very short, very sweet. I'm like, okay, fine. All the while I'm like, oh my God, this poor water, it must feel like a lab rat. I was feeling so bad about saying yes to this whole situation. And I do understand his reasoning for doing it this way. This is often the very traditional scientific method. But he got to about day 7 or 8. It was winding up, and I'm just like, oh gosh, this isn't going to go anywhere. And one morning he messaged me, and he explained that there was definitely something there. All of his colleagues concurred that they all saw the same image. So that meant image recognition. But it didn't look like what was on the screen, what it had stopped at, the random pictures, right? And I said, okay, well, what's on the screen? And he told me that it was a photo of a stainless steel hospital tray with a human heart organ in it. And I was like, oh, that's big, whatever. Like, okay, well, like, what did the water show? And he sent me the photo. I haven't had permission to share it. So what I shared in the book was something I got very similar. It was basically a round shape with 2 eyes, a nose, and a sad face, just like a sad emoji. And I said to him, oh, you think that crystallography has nothing to do with the heart inside of the stainless steel container? He said, no, it doesn't look anything like it. I said, perhaps water is saying, where is your heart?
Beautiful, beautiful,
And so,
beautiful.
so even though he thought this was actually really interesting, it didn't go any further.
Wow. But water is part of our own consciousness, isn't it? So you can't be that dislocated in how you do that kind of work, because it is the relationship, isn't it? Your work has demonstrated that in spades. It's the relationship. And what I was also fascinated on that same theme is if you push water too hard with, say, artificial EMFs, water actually becomes quite destructive, which
Well, that
was
was interesting.
fascinating. Talk about that. Yeah.
I'm so grateful. Sadly, Jonathan Butts passed very, very quickly after having written that section in the book quite suddenly. So huge respect to him and great gratitude to him for sharing this. And I had long conversations with him about it as well. And he was working with water in a very unique stage because many people would think that water couldn't be fire. They have separated fire and water, to be different elements. But in fact, water can be a fire. If you burn water at a certain vaporous stage, which is what Jonathan was working with, it creates something, I think it's called plasar, which is like a laser and a flame. And it looks exactly like a flame, except that's implosion, and it can burn at something like 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extremely what we might term as hot, but you can get right close to it, it won't burn you. So they were working and within this phase of water. And he was like a nuclear engineer and something, and then he was working on various other things, and he designed the natural action tech vortexing machine thing. And so what they observed was that when this flame was burning or moving or whatever you want to call it, looks like it was burning. If they let it just go and go and go and go for like 24 hours with no break at all, it appeared that water, this state of water, would give such a big electrical pushback that it would nearly blow up their very, very expensive machinery.
That's
And
incredible.
but if he gave it half an hour every 2 hours, it would work very efficiently. And even though he, from a very, logical perspective, said to other scientists, this is what it did. This is what my colleagues all saw. They were like, no, it's not possible. Water can't do that. But I would suggest that actually water can absolutely do that, especially when we're working in different phases. I think it's these different phases where we're going to see some really spectacular things, which is why I think we get to see such amazing results in this phase of crystallography that I use, because it's, I haven't frozen water solid in over 9 years. So it's a liquid crystal phase. And that's a very unique phase. And so in this other stage he's seeing unique things too. I think my takeaway though from Jonathan's part in the book was where he said that the water molecule will always heal itself before it heals its environment.
Yeah, that is so profound because it sort of links also with when you did the test with 5G. You put water for 15 minutes next to a 5G tower, and the crystallography was like a shock. It was literally like a sort of electric shock, wasn't it? But you found that if you rested it, it would produce more natural patterns. But then when you did it 3 years later, you actually found that the water had evolved and could handle almost the 5G shock much better than 3 years previously, which was fascinating because it suggests that's what's happening to us with all of these 5G towers and the increased level of EMFs in our environment, that we are able to evolve beyond them and handle them. You know, if a medieval person turned up now, they'd be poleaxed probably because they've had no time to acclimatize. So that I found was absolutely fascinating in your work.
I think it's hopeful because there's a lot of bad news out there. We need a lot of good news. And every time I work with water, I keep seeing the good news. So what was going on with that was really where in the original, when 5G first came out, I would let the water, I was using spring water. So we can identify a signature pattern. We know that looks like a large, beautiful hexagonal pattern. Then I let that melt. Then I took it to the 5G tower, came back, then refroze the same water, and we saw the shock wave. And then every time I would let it melt and refreeze, we saw that there was this shock wave going through it for as long as I could do, which is only about 7 to 8 melts and refreezes until you're not left with any water. But I decided to retry that. I went and I used the exact same water source. I used the same freezer. I used the same 5G tower, did the same whole process, and I saw the shock wave in the very first test. I let that melt. But what was curious and amazing to me was that the next refreeze just showed a little disorder, but two very clear hydroglyphs. We have the information glyph, and the message glyph. So we have like a message of information. And these glyphs are repeatable. So they're not random. And we use words, and not just English words as well, the same word in multiple languages and see the same symbol appear. So it's like a Rosetta Stone in some ways, words, to understand this sort of symbolic language of water. So there is an energy of a word. It's not really a word. There's a difference. So there was the energy of the word information and the energy of the word message. So water is giving itself an updated message of information. And then I let that melt and refroze it. And what we saw next was patterns even more beautiful than the very first original pattern of spring water. Not water had not just only healed, but became more beautiful structurally. And I think that's amazing.
I mean, that's so hopeful for our future, isn't it? That water is constantly almost going beyond anything in its environment. Water is ahead of us. Nature is ahead of us. We're the laggards actually, in human matter in a way. And I just find that absolutely, absolutely fascinating. And something else you said that interested me a great deal, Veda, was you said that distilled water is the observer. And I know with distilled water, you don't get such complex patterns in the crystallography, but distilled water is the observer, but spring water is the observer and the active participant as well. And which was fascinating. So is that because of the naturally occurring minerals in spring water, do you think?
Oh, firstly, I love that you even picked up on all of that. Like, I speak about that a lot, and so it's just nice to hear it spoken back to me because I do think that. Yes, I think that this anything that has salts and minerals in it means that it is able to store information. And we see that anything that's storing information can share it within a crystallographic medium, such as water. It's interesting because with distilled water, we have the distinct kind of signature pattern of distilled water. It's not that distilled water doesn't create any patterns at all. It does have a signature pattern. It just doesn't design complex crystallography. And I see that because of this very special word in Maori, which is for spirit, which is wairua, it means the two waters. There's a very rudimentary way of saying it. There are much more deeper meanings, and the meanings vary with different tribes, but essentially it's like the spiritual and physical waters. And I think one of the many spiritual aspects of water is that water can be the observer. And what I see with distilled water is because it's not showing me any of the things I'm showing it, it's like it's just watching, but it's not participating. Then we look at life. There isn't any life that doesn't have salts and minerals in it. It's always a combination of water, salts, minerals, and consciousness. So it's these salts and minerals that give something, along with water and consciousness, this living principle. And that living principle means that we have some impression upon the world just by being seen, and if it means there's an impression that we grow, there is thoughts, there is feelings, there are, even the tiniest little kind of creatures in the ocean have a purpose and a place, and they're observed. And so because of that, these things, all these things, from trees, all the way to elephants to people, have have some kind of information within them. And that information is being shared because anything alive tends to have an electrical charge. And so we are memory storers when we have these salts and minerals. And by an active participant, I mean we're alive, we're moving, we're sharing, we're learning. And we can also observe ourselves. So as human beings, if we just take that perspective, we can get memories. This will be somebody's memory. This is my memory, your memory. And once this is over, it'll be my memory. I remember that time we spoke to each other. It was lovely. And and we'll remember that.
Mm.
And I think it's interesting to ask the question, why do we have memory? Because we talk about this idea of water having memory, but what's the point of it? One of the points of having memory is that we learn. And so it's not surprising that we see water self-learning and evolving and recording and observing. So this is like a very big topic, but we can, sorry, my son's going skating. But we can as human beings observe ourselves through deep meditation, through some people do it through psychedelic experiences. Some people have a near-death experience. Some people can just simply do it and observe themselves. And so we can, if we have two worlds, the one we live in and the one we live on, and if everything we experience in this world is felt through the one we live in, so we see, actually it's taken in through the eyes, hearing is in through the ears, scent is in through the nose, taste is in through the tongue, touch is in through the fingers and the body. And we experience the world like this. Our imagination is within the body, we think. All the feelings, we think they're all within the body. So what do we experience outside of the physical body? And one of the things that we can experience is to be the observer,
Yeah.
even through the dream time.
Yeah.
But if we're just only the observer, we're not actively interacting or making memories, we're just watching, we're not judging. So that's what I see with distilled water. I truly think that it's the salts and minerals that are that part of the earth mixed with the heaven, which I think is part of the water, that create this living body of information and memories and life.
Yeah, because as you say, you need the salt for it to be electromagnetic, to hold an electrical charge, and to hold the information more fully. So that's what's fascinating, because we're all electromagnetic beings. We animals, everything alive really has an electromagnetic charge, and that's how we interact with the plasma out there to manifest our reality. So this becomes really fascinating, doesn't it, that salt is so crucial. And I think you mentioned in a previous conversation that without salt you die in 48 hours. I think
Yes,
you mentioned
yes,
that.
we don't realize just how significant salt is within the human body. I speak to a friend of mine who's a medical doctor, and he said, yeah, maybe even sooner, but his guesstimate was we'd be gone in 48 hours if we had no salt in the body. Salt helps us perform function in so many more ways than we imagine. So salt is a very interesting thing because essentially it's a crystal. So, and it's an electrical crystal. So when you add salt into water, it's another shapeshifter like water, and a kind of another immortal in quotes, if you will, because it doesn't necessarily die in the way we imagine. So when you put salt into water, it gives water this new liquid crystal aspect because it has a charge, more charge now. And when the water evaporates, the salts, oh, there they are, back in their form as well, which is really interesting. And then, even when somebody is cremated, the ashes are actually salts. So the water evaporates and there the salts are still there. And so when we're talking about this arena of salt, it's like, oh, right, it's still there. And whereas with water as well, we might say it's denatured, destructured, that's dead water. There's terms we've used, but it's not a reality because it will always evaporate and go into its next phase.
Yeah.
It doesn't technically die.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
given that molecular count, we're 99% water.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what's another beautiful thing that you've discovered in your work, that water never dies. It can be restructured and enlivened and made to be really healthy water, even if it stayed stagnant in a bottle for a long time, or stagnant in a river. That you can resurrect it. And that's what another aspect I think that's really thrilling about your work. I mean, this book is just full of miraculous explorations, I think, and your open curiosity is just glorious, because it's your open curiosity that's really led you on this journey to be taught by water, almost as a spiritual teacher, which is what I absolutely love. um, and I know that already, because we had a quick pre-chat, I know already that you have some exciting plans about where your work is going, even beyond this book, even though this book was only published a month ago. You've got some ideas on where your work will go next, and I'd love for you to share that side, Veda, as well.
Of course, thank you, Pam. Yes, well, you know, we're ever evolving and water is constantly moving. And I think that's another thing. You know, always in flow, so it's always taking me somewhere. We get to choose which tributary we want to go down. There's just so many to choose from. I've always been very, very interested in the ancient mysteries, and I was studying actually to be an archaeologist at one point, which is why I became a researcher, and then I became a mother, and you know, and I'm an artist, so we're all rather multifaceted. Now I'm focusing in the area of water, and I don't see that changing at all for the for the rest of my life. So I am going to be taking time next year to go to a lot of ancient sacred sites. So going to Egypt, probably going to some sacred sites in Greece, sacred sites here in New Zealand. Very, very special, special place, New Zealand. Not to be overlooked. I hope you can come one day, Pam. And because New Zealand is rising, and the area around New Zealand that has been mapped, there's a huge landmass that goes just about all the way to Australia, and it's called the eighth continent of the world, Zealandia.
Yeah, I'm
So
aware of that because land masses are re-emerging, and that's part of the astrology too. In fact, I think they were the ancient land masses of ancient Lemuria that are
I
coming.
agree. Yeah. And so New Zealand is just the tip of that,
Yeah.
which means it's got to be huge. Anyway, so I'm going to be working with water in these places. So I'm going into the pyramids and the different temples around Egypt and with my water and doing crystallography to see what water might show us about this. I'm going to be putting water on languages of which have not been deciphered yet
Wow.
and working with archaeologists to really see what can we learn, given that I have a, a bit of a understanding, I say a bit, it's just that it's so huge to really pack it all in about hydroglyphs. There's these three ways that water communicates with my work. So a signature pattern, which is the pattern that water reveals of the type of water it is, an artistic expression, and then hydroglyphs. They are three separate things. And hydroglyphs are where I've used word influences, the same word in lots of languages, and seen the same symbol appear, which means that I've got a little bit of a guide as to what meanings could be, because there are multiple meanings with each symbol that weave together somehow. So with using undeciphered languages, water starting to show me some hydroglyphs. So I'm just starting to piece this together now, very, very slowly. It's going to be a big year next year of me working on that. And I'm also working a little bit with some things with you around putting water out on very specific astrological times of potency to see what water might show us. I think that the ancients knew about the significance of not just water, but all heavenly bodies. See, we've taken things apart and not seeing them as a collective.
Yes.
I think that's what we've consistently done, even by just labeling things. We then have to say a word. You know, I just did an extremely long webinar interviewing people that have had near-death experiences, and consistently everybody that had had an experience explained that if they met with someone on the other side, they didn't speak, they were telepathic. And I think that we have this ability innately within us. And what I think water is slowly guiding us towards is a remembering of how to do that.
I
Because
agree.
by being able to see pictures and internalizing what that means, it's not just, it's stepping away from the linear word and water's kind of reversed engineered it back to some kind of living principle. Now, another very interesting piece, and I've already seen the cover of this new book that I'm going to be writing, even though it hasn't been written yet, which will be called Water and the Ancient Mysteries, is based on some of the, what we might term coding that I've observed in water. So I was recently at breakfast with a friend of mine, Tim Moon, who was one of the archaeologists working on the Bosnian pyramid. And I said, hey, Tim, what do you think of this? And he said, oh my God, that's just like Sumerian cuneiform. And he said, what is it? And I'm like, well, it's water. And so I showed him this, and I showed him this, and he said, God, it looks just like coding, which I think, of course, is undeniable that it does. And what's really interesting about this is that I see that pattern when using the word information, where I write the word, put my dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, remove, freeze, and see. But what's fascinating is that because I have such a large team globally now, we've all seen that pattern, whether we use that word or not. And we're starting to be able to categorize those certain patterns. So I've got this group of people starting to put these like glyphs in a way into categories. Ones with certain lines doing this, one with certain patterns doing this, and we're starting to see repeated patterns. Now, when Tim saw it, he was thinking maybe we introduce some kind of an AI where we feed in the different meanings that we know from ancient language, and then see if that you can pick up the repeating patterns of the water, this coding, and see if we can decipher some meaning. Or even if we just start with repeated patterns. And I've seen enough repeated patterns already to know that, yes, it means information, but each one must have far more there. I mean, information is so general. With each one, there's got to be so much more. And that's what I feel like, I often say this, Pam, I feel like I've landed on a planet where I have no idea what anyone is saying. There's all these, other beings trying to talk to me, and I'm like, I have no concept for what you're saying. Let me try to start somewhere. And with hydroglyphs, I need people around the world to help me. And I do have that now. So I feel like I'm getting somewhere. So what I think we're seeing, just to kind of cut to the chase in that work, and it's leaping forward from base one, which is this collection of data, I suppose, is that I think we're seeing water in its constant state of updating information. And that if the Akashic records were held anywhere, I believe it has to be in water. Not necessarily only in liquid water, because we have water in the air. We have so many different phases of water that have yet to be discovered, I believe, as well as the multiple subtle information in every single stage we do know about. What we're seeing there is complex coding, and my new book will be delving very, very deeply into that, as well as all the crystallography I get from the sacred sites I'll be going to.
That's so fascinating, because my understanding, Veda, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but my understanding is underneath many of the pyramids across the world, there is water. Which is what, one fascinating thing, isn't it? Why were they built? That's one thing. But also, and I think Robert Edward Grant is very much in this camp as well, as is Robert James Comber, that the pyramids are way, way older, many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years older than we've been led to believe. So, and that starts to get into, well, who really built them? And I know that with Robert Edward Grant's work, he's really starting to think about, were these galactic beings that built it? Because inside the king's chamber, you may know from his Christmas visit, that he was picking up the zodiac signs in the correct order. Well, why were they astrological signs within the king's chamber? Why weren't they written in Chinese or Spanish? And because of the configuration of two large pyramids and one smaller offset one, which is the mirror image of Orion, both of those things lead you to believe that the architects, the builders of the pyramids, came from the out there, not the ground level. And so, because they were also writing in the language of the stars, the constellations. So, will you be starting to, I don't know if you can answer this question, but will you be starting to touch on a kind of galactic heritage and start to remind us that we are also galactic citizens, galactic beings as well?
I have to. I mean, I can't not. Can't not do that inquiry and see how water will respond. I've already been, even with crop circles, water, I'm starting to see some very interesting hydroglyphs coming from putting water on certain crop circles. And many of them seem to come back with the hydroglyph, a couple of hydroglyphs. One is two circles that join, which we know has the energetic meaning of conception.
Wow.
And also seeds. Seeds play a huge part in the language of the ancients. Seeds of thought, seeds of physicality, seeds of love, seeds of doubt, seeds of all kinds of things. It's always been like there's been multiple positive seeds, but if there's that one seed of doubt, things change. And so that's more what I'm going to be talking about later, but there's just so much there. And then you look at those baskets that the ancients are holding, those
So like little
handbags.
handbags here.
And I show the crystallography for what water has shown me when I've put the dish of water on top of those. Well, you think about seeds, and you really, if you ask ancient people about seeds, they have a lot to say. Well, I'm sure they would, but the indigenous tribes certainly do. But you think about it in our known universe, and obviously that's tiny compared to everything else, but in our known universe, I think one of the rarest things is it's not diamonds, not those kinds of things, there's no minerals, it's wood. Where else are we seeing trees on other planets?
Yeah.
Seeds. Seeds are the most potent, powerful things, so I am not surprised that when I put a seed into the petri dish, it shows the outcome of the seed. It could easily be that seeds are what seed the universe, different types of seeds, because they project the outcome of the seed. I think that this is some of the areas where I'm going to start with the next work.
Wow. I mean, this takes me straight to the dwarf planet Teheron Hyawako, that was the creator farmer god, and it was all about the seeds, collecting enough seeds for the next harvest to make sure everyone was fed properly. That's absolutely fascinating. Wow. But going back to the crop circles, just like the pyramids, I understand that with the crop circles, there is water underneath the crop circles because they tend to appear on chalk, which is porous.
Yeah, it's fascinating. With the ancient world, it was, I'm sure, intentionally done, where very sacred rocks and buildings and temples, pyramids were built, where there was water. And that's not a mistake. That's not just a random mistake. Where there's flowing water, there's also certain charge,
Yeah, yeah.
especially when mixed with certain minerals. It was interesting because two little things before we end. Um, a lady was on one of my talks, and she talked about how she went down into the Giza pyramid and was able, like, paid her way to get down the rickety old, ladder. It's probably very dangerous. And there is an underwater a place under the pyramid, really, really far down, where there is water. And she was able to scoop some of that out and test it. And when it tested, it came back as salt water, which was really interesting because the Nile is fresh water.
Right.
So then she said, "Where's it coming from?" And she was tracing it, trying to trace it all the way back. Well, that's fascinating too, because when you have salt water, and this is a whole nother topic we could get into, but I wrote a book that I never published, I've never shared, called Soul Archaeology, and I talked about the significance of saturated salt water and pyramids and what the ancient used it for and how they used salt water. So when she said there was salt water, and it's like, oh, and my ears picked up. And so what's interesting is that I went to in New Zealand, an area called the Kaimanawa Wall, and some people think that it's just a natural formation where it looks like a bit of like a megalithic stone where it looks like it's been cut. But many people think that it is a megalithic stone and that was purposefully cut in a certain way. Well, on one of my adventures around New Zealand, I stopped there and I took some water from the area and I actually put it on the stone and I left it there. And then I brought it back and I did the crystallography. And what fascinated me was that even though the water that I'd collected was just from rain from a puddle nearby, I just thought, well, I wanted it to be from the area. Right. So I know what the signature pattern of rain looks like. It looks like fanning pattern with a kind of curve. But what I saw was the signature pattern of seawater, which has multiple meanings. So it looks like a little indented subwoofer with a star inside, and there's lots of them. So to see that, we know that that is also a hydroglyph with the energetic meaning of electrical charge and salt. So why would I see that in the middle of a forest of New Zealand where there was not any kind of sea anywhere nearby? And so is there electrical charge that's coming from that stone? Was it in the ocean once? You know, there's lots of questions that come. I'm really curious to see if when I go to different sacred sites, if I see any commonality of patterning.
Fascinating.
I'd really like to see that, because that especially with the ancients, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were not primitive at all.
No, we are, I think, generally, we're way behind them. Yeah, they were very advanced in their understandings. And
And
very
I
concentrated salt solution is incredibly healing, isn't it? It's got a
yes, well, you
particular
can
name.
isolate.
Yeah, it's got that's it. Incredibly healing. And the Dead Sea is anything but dead, because that's incredibly healing for people as well.
Well, I've often, I did this wonderful thing once where I have a friend called Laurent Costa, and I had this beautiful healing water, and one of the things I would do was, because I thought, well, how can water, you can say water's structured when it's just sitting on a supermarket shelf, knowing that you can't, the structures that you get from freezing water at 1 hour after collection from a spring looks completely different than when you get spring water in a plastic bottle from a supermarket, because the structures have degraded so much, because water's supposed to move, it's sensitive to light, all these factors. So I thought, well, how can people say that water stays structured? How do they know that? How can they say that it's like a blanket statement saying that? So I'm like, what would structure water for a longer time? And then I thought about us as human beings being bodies of water with structure. And I thought, well, we're not distilled water, we are an ocean. So I said, even though the water I was working with was a lovely, uh, came from an underwater aquifer here in New Zealand, beautiful water. But I thought, let's add a little bit of Soleil, because that was just an intuitive feeling to see, does it help to keep water structured or not? This was years ago, and so I got my little bit of Soleil, which is just, where you can make it where you put a glass jar, you put rocks, big, not the finely cut salt, but big solid rocks, if you can get them, of salt. Fill it with the best water you've got. I always suggest a natural spring water. And then leave it for a couple of days until all the water has absorbed the salt and there's just like a residue on the bottom. And then you take that liquid water and you just put 1 teaspoon or quarter or half a teaspoon, sorry, into a glass of water. So what I did was that I took 2 bottles of water from this beautiful water source, one with Soleil in it, just a little bit of Soleil, and one that didn't. They were in blue glass bottles, so they were protected from light, and I sent them to my friend Laurent Costa because he looks down the microscope and takes microscopic photographs of flash frozen water. Now, what was interesting is that it went all the way to France. They went all the way to France, went to the wrong address, got resent back to New Zealand, and then I resent them back to the right address. So they had all that EMF. I'm like, oh my gosh, this water's going to look terrible because it's been around the world so many times and it's gone through so many planes and so many X-rays or whatever it's gone through. I had no hope really of like what it might look like. When Laurent finally did the crystallography, though, he found that that it had impacted quite a lot, the water, and so he didn't see a lot of structure in the one that didn't have the soleil. But the one that did showed crystallography that looked, the way to explain it really is more like if you imagine what Masaru Emoto's crystallography looks like for, love and gratitude. But here's a curious thing. It looked like this beautiful kind of snowflake, but in the middle, there were these little round dots of blue. And that was the kind of the salt, power of salt. It had color. It had this blue color that was in a circle of little round dots in the center of the ice crystal. So soleil helps water to store information for much, much longer. And if we're talking about holding its structure for longer periods of time, that was when I knew that my theory had become proven.
That's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, and it suggests that it is very healing. It helps your health because the more structured the water in you, the healthier you are generally. Wow. Your work is absolutely enthralling, Veda. I could talk to you for days about this. I mean, it's just wonderful, but I know you're a very busy lady and I must let you go. But I just love this conversation. And if anyone wants to explore Veda's book further, I'm going to put Veda's website underneath this video, which is just vedaausten.com, and people can order directly from there. Now, I think you've worked out a very clever way to avoid very high shipping costs because you must have very sort of local distribution stations where the shipping is actually very good value. So don't worry, people, if you've got a very large book arriving from New Zealand, it's very reasonable.
Thank you. No, it was a whole process, but it is explained what the process is on my website, so we don't have to go into it now.
Right, right, fabulous. I've loved this conversation with you, and just really bless your work because you are in a real pioneering, unique position of water has chosen you as the channel to get its message out to the world, and I'm just really honored to have shared this with you today. So thank you so much, Veda, and all good wishes and blessings with your book. And it's going to be a huge success for you, and it's your legacy too. So
Thank
God
you.
bless you.
Thank you so much.
Love to everyone.